Most people are familiar with the Sony Ericsson Xperia Play or the so-called PlayStation phone. But did you know that it wasn't the first time Sony Ericsson tried to create a portable console-like experience on their phones? Welcome to Myorknet, and this is the story of the Sony Ericsson EGB-10 Gameboard.
To understand how it came to be in the first place, we need to go back to the beginnings of mobile gaming in general to understand how it became something phone companies like Sony Ericsson would be interested in. The first mobile game that really took off was the legendary Snake that started to be pre-installed on Nokia devices in 1998. 350 million copies have been shipped since. It quickly became apparent that people were getting into gaming on their cellular devices. With the introduction of VIP, or the Wireless Application Protocol technology that enabled phones to be connected to the internet, buying new games and online multiplayer was rendered possible. That created a way for various developers to make games and sell them to willing mobile players. The next important step for the mobile games industry was the debut of the Java to Micro Edition programming environment that later would become the de facto market standard for cell phone gaming. Not only did its new engine allow to develop more advanced games, but also run programs in virtual machine rather than directly on the device, which allowed games developed with it to be platform independent. With all of this in mind, we can enter the year 2001, when Sony and Ericsson had finalized the merger of their mobile phone divisions and created Sony Ericsson. From the beginning, Sony Ericsson's strategy was to release multimedia-focused devices, so it was obvious that sooner or later they would dip their toes in mobile gaming. It wasn't until 2002 that the newly formed company would release its first cell phone, the T68i. It wasn't really a new device, only a refreshed version of the Ericsson's T68, even though it was one of the first mass-market phones with full-color display. It didn't have much graphically intense games that could take advantage of its display. Having Reversi, Battleships, and 4 solitaire games built in, it didn't have much to show for itself compared to Java-compatible phones that had already been available at the time of its release. Still, it has some games worth mentioning. The first one would be Erix, which was inspired by the successful arcade game from 1981 called Kicks. In Erix, all you have to do is cut out more and more rectangular areas of the playing board until you count 75% of it, while avoiding obstacles. If you succeed, you move to the next level. Erix would later appear on multiple Sony Ericsson devices, and this isn't the last time we will be taking a look at it in this video. Second to last on the list is a game called Q, a puzzle game in which your goal is to maneuver colored balls around so they can fall into matching pockets. The balls are selected by the cursor and rolled in the direction of your choice, but movement is only stopped by walls or other balls. You have to plan ahead to successfully get them all in the right place. With each next of all 60 levels, the puzzles get progressively more difficult, and it can really take quite a lot of time to complete them all.
Only a few months after the T68i premiered, Sony Ericsson presented its new lineup of phones, T200, T300 and the T600. Of these three, the T300 will be the first ever mobile phone to come with Mophan game engine integrated. Mophan was created by a Swedish company, Synergenics Interactive, and had been in development since 1998. It is conceptually similar to Java. Like Java, Mophan runs programs in a virtual machine, so they are platform independent. But it has some advantages over Java that make it superior from a technical point of view. Not only its programs occupy half the memory as similar Java ones, but also Mophan applications can run much faster than its competitors. In 2002, Sony Ericsson decided to adopt Mophan as a standard for their phones and signed a deal to embed the engine in their new devices. Its implementation allowed the T300 to run much more technically impressive games than the T68i. We still can play Erics, but this time it runs faster than the older model. Besides this classic, it has 3 new Mobhun games, pre-installed as well. The first one of the 3 is a Space Invaders influenced game called Alien Scam. Your objective is to defend your spaceship against various aliens and eliminate as much of them as you can before you lose all of your free lives. You have access to bonus items such as deployable shields and missiles to help you defeat the aliens. You will definitely need them, as Alien Scam isn't the easiest game, mostly because of the delay between your key presses and the response of the ship, which matters because the aliens are constantly moving and shooting back at you. The next game, called Black Deal, is nothing more than blackjack, with some fancy background graphics, when compared to all the T68 solitaire games, where you play against the bank. And the third one is minigolf, in which, as the name suggests, you complete different minigolf courses by hitting the ball into a hole on each one. At first, you choose the direction in which you want to swing the ball, then by clicking the confirm button in the right time, you control the strength of your swing and its accuracy. At the end, what matters is to score in the least amount of moves. While the inbuilt games might still not seem like that much of an upgrade over the last gen games on the T68i, and especially Black Deal and Minigolf still don't see much action in them. Those games weren't the only games available for users at the time. With downloading games by VAP becoming ever so popular, it was no problem for people to get to download from the growing library of Mobhun games. On the other hand, maybe there was a reason why the T300 didn't come with more action-packed games. As you probably have noticed, its screen isn't the best, with awful ghosting being its worst part. To be honest, it seems to be overall even worse than the T60ai screen. There was also another problem for the T300. Mobhun itself, despite it being very easy for programmers to use, it hadn't really seen much popularity. It was used only by Sony Ericsson and some models of Siemens phones, but it wasn't able to reach much more adoption than that. The main reason for this seems to have been the strict approval process, which was employed by Synergenics. The compiled Mobhun programs could only run under an emulator, and its parent company had to approve the program so it can be used on a mobile device. There were some registered and approved developers that could use self-certification, but they still were allowed to only have one email number, and more importantly, every developer had to sign a sales contract with Synergenics that made sharing free Mobhun programs impossible. All of this discouraged many developers from creating programs for the platform. It doesn't mean that there weren't any games for Mobhun, but it put it at a disadvantage to Java, that was rapidly gaining popularity and slowly becoming the default.
Just a month after release of the T300, phone gaming market was shaken by an announcement made by Nokia at the Mobile Internet Conference. In October 2002, Nokia revealed that it had been working on a device that would offer console-quality gaming on the go. It was, of course, the Nokia N-Gage, which was the first device of its kind. It would take advantage of an already existing mobile network and bring online multiplayer to a new level, while also providing hardware that could run even 3D games. N-Gage was supposed to be attractive for both game publishers, who would be able to sell high-quality games for mobile devices, and network operators, who would gain new revenue through increased data usage. That kind of announcement was guaranteed to provoke a response from Nokia's competition. Sony Ericsson, already having released the 300, which one of its selling points being its gaming capability, had to respond. With N-Gage, planned release set in February 2003, Sony Ericsson didn't have much time. Their first answer would come in the form of the T310, which was presented alongside the T610. The T610 was the high-end option and the successor to the T68i, while the T310 was an improved T100 and was presented once again as a gaming phone of the lineup. Where the T610 had Bluetooth, an inbuilt camera, finally Java support, and a better screen, each T310 had a pre-installed copy of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4. Inclusion of this game on Sony Ericsson's new phone was an obvious attempt to provide an answer to N-Gage's flagship game, original Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. Sony Ericsson tried to rival Nokia with a port of 3 years newer Pro Skater 4. Despite supposedly having a newer game on their mobile phone, Pro Skater 4 ported to Mobhun wasn't really comparable to the N-Gage's nearly as technically advanced as the original port of the PlayStation 1 game. But what mattered for Sony was that they were able to offer their customers a port of one of the best-selling console video games at the time on their mobile devices. But the T310 had one critical issue: it wasn't much of an upgrade over the T300. And it inherited its flaws. T310 still didn't support Java and was equipped with the same screen that was capable of displaying only 256 colors and had a problem with ghosting. The T310 seemed like mostly a cosmetic update over its predecessor and definitely wasn't going to stand a chance against the N-Gage, even though Nokia postponed its premiere to October 2003 and the T310 was first to market. But Sony Ericsson had another idea how to present an alternative to the upcoming N-Gage. Why release a specialized phone focused only on gaming when you can turn every phone into a gaming device with an optional accessory targeting mobile gamers? That idea was realized with the announcement of EGB-10 Gameboard in September 2003.
This new gameboard added a possibility of a gamepad-like controls for compatible Sony Ericsson phones. It is made of solid plastic and is more comfortable to hold by an inclusion of handles. Instead of using the inbuilt joystick on your phone, you gain access to an 8-directional D-pad, and instead of your phone's keyboard, you can use 4 action buttons. In the middle of EGB-10 is a slot where you can mount your mobile phone and plug the gameboard connector into it. Even though you have to plug the connector into your phone's charging port, Gameboard has an additional port at its bottom, which makes gaming and charging your device at the same time possible. On the same day as the Gameboard, Sony Ericsson would announce their first clamshell phone, which would also be the first one to be compatible with the new accessory. Touted as a gaming phone, the Z600 was there to finally live up to this title, and it dealt with most of its predecessor's problems. On the inside, it was basically the same as the T610, which meant it would be able to run Java applications and offered the best feature set that Sony Ericsson could provide at the time on their phones, including the same inbuilt camera. But when it comes to running games, the most important change from the T310 and T300 was a new screen that was even better than that of the T610. The TFT screen of the Z600 allowed for up to 65,000 colors and finally got rid of the ghosting problem. Z600 was also equipped with a multi-action keypad that made simultaneous key presses a possibility. The Z600 fits almost perfectly into the Gameboard, which can be set for all compatible devices. All of this makes this duo the best way to experience Mobhun games on their original hardware. So let's take a look at some of the more interesting ones and enjoy using this unique gaming equipment. Let's start with another home console classic ported to Mobhun, Colin McRae Rally 4. Once again, Sony Ericsson had managed to gain a game from a popular console franchise for their phones before Nokia did with their Colin McRae Rally 2005 for N-Gage. Of course, due to technological limitation, the Mobhun port was also once again less impressive than the N-Gage's. But it doesn't mean it isn't worth talking about, quite the opposite. It seems to be one of the best racing games on Mobhun platform. Developers managed to make all the menus look as if they were directly copied from the original console game. Even though you play from a top-down perspective, you can feel the speed as you drive and slide around the bends of the cleverly designed courses while avoiding hitting obstacles. All of this makes completing the track satisfying, even if you can only steer left or right or brake, because your car auto-accelerates. Yet the gameplay isn't all sunshine and roses. The main problem with the game is the difficulty level. To advance to the next stage, you have to beat all the tight times of the fictional rally drivers. After trying to get the best time on the first stage for the 10th time and not being able to play on the next part of the course, playing quickly becomes frustrating.
Next game is the only game we will be looking at in this video that tries to add a story element to its gameplay. After starting a new game in Captain Lunar, you are greeted with an opening crawl, which even has reference to the famous Star Wars opening in its text. It introduces the plot of the game. starting with describing a great city laying in ruins in a galaxy not so far away. This great city is Toronto, and it has been destroyed by a war-driven race of aliens. Only a few have survived, and those few fled underground to prepare a counterattack. To aid them in this upcoming war, they created a giant mechanical mechs. The player takes a role of the titular Captain Lunar, who goes ahead on a reconnaissance. When you complete all the stages, you can find out that the battle for Toronto waged for months, but in the end the evil aliens were defeated with our help, of course. As for how the gameplay looks, Captain Lunar is a platformer in which you can fly from platform to platform, collect gears and power-ups, while avoiding coming in contact with aliens moving around the stage. What's worth mentioning about controls is that the game is one of the few games that takes advantage of the 8-directional D-pad on the gameboard. You can move diagonally. That instantly makes Captain Lunar one of the best games on this list. That's not where the positives end though. It might not be easy to collect all the gears in the first try, but it makes the gameplay even more interesting because you have to learn the stage a bit before deciding how to go around completing it.
Now the time has come for an RPG game for us to check out. In Dawn of the Vampire, you play as none other than a vampire that has to solve various puzzles and fight zombies to advance to the next stage. You have to get through rooms in a castle and collect blood vials while keeping an eye on the timer. When it reaches 0, the game ends, so you have to complete the puzzles as fast as possible to extend your time. Dawn of the Vampire is one of the games that is worse to play on the gameboard than on the phone's keyboard. Not only does the game not take an advantage of the gameboard's 8-way D-pad, but it also makes controlling your character a tedious job. You often have to hold your finger pressing hard on the D-pad for a long time because of how slow the vampire moves, and because if you don't hold your finger firm in place enough, your character will stop moving. You also have to avoid clicking in diagonal direction buttons, because they seem to randomly choose how to interpret your action. For example, when you click the upper right directional button, you sometimes move up and sometimes right. That's what makes maneuvering in Dawn of the Vampire annoying and uncomfortable to play on the gameboard. But what's the best about this game is its design. Its menu has a nice tune playing in the background, and at the same time it looks fancy for a mobile game from that time. You know which option you have selected by an animated icon of a bat. The same bats from time to time fly around the levels, which makes them look more lively and climatic. That's because all the pixel art in the game already looks great. What stands out the most is the smoothness of the animations and the game in general, which makes the whole experience feel polished.
Honey Cave 2 is probably one of the most well-known games from Obhun, and it's no wonder. It's yet another platformer, but this time we play as a bear made of honey, which equipped with a gun fights its way through enemy bees. Because the bees are also carrying guns, you have a honey HP gauge, which you can refill by drinking from the honey waterfalls that are scattered around the map. You activate moving platforms, which allow you to get to some parts of the level by jumping on interactive switches placed near them. Once again, we can use gameboard to the fullest with this game, because it assigns all the buttons to a function. Nonetheless, it's sometimes hard to not miss the dialog buttons, so it's safer to use the 8-way D-pad as a regular 4-way D-pad and combine it with the A action button to jump in a specific direction. Yet, jumping from platform to platform often requires you to carefully move to the very edge of the first platform to be able to reach the next one. This forces you to be more wary of your every move and slows down the whole gameplay in general.
The last game we'll cover today is Labyrinthus, a game that's more of a tech demo than a game with complicated gameplay. It uses primitive 3D graphics to render a simple yet impressive maze with high-resolution wall textures. Your goal is to collect treasure and find an appropriate shaped key to open a door to the next level. It isn't possible to freely look around. You can only look directly in front of you and can rotate 90 degrees left or right with each click of either left or right directional button accordingly. That's why you can easily get lost in this labyrinth, because all the walls look the same unless you have doors on them. The puzzles progressively get longer with each level, but the core gameplay stays mostly the same, and it doesn't ever get that too exciting, especially with how rough the movement feels. Even so, Labyrinthus definitely stands out in terms of its graphics when compared to other mob hunt games, so it deserves attention for that.
Even though it seems like it was the less crazy, easier to realize, cheaper to produce and more versatile way of achieving a portable console-like experience on a mobile phone when compared to N-Gage, in the end EGB-10 didn't achieve a widespread adoption, but after using it for a while, it doesn't feel very surprising. Playing games with the Gameboard isn't really much of an improvement over playing it directly on the phone. The reason for that is that the games that are available to play with it weren't created with the Gameboard in mind, but for the phone's inbuilt controls. Only a small handful of games support the 8-way D-pad, and even less implement vertical movement with it. There simply isn't a way to use it to its full potential. Even still, the pad isn't the most comfortable to use. The buttons feel stiff and the handles are too short to support your full hand, unlike the other Sony controllers for their home consoles. Also, it seems that only the Z600 fits the phone mount well, while other compatible devices, like the newer T630, are too small to be held by it in place, which makes gaming on the Gameboard an even worse experience on other devices. The last nail in the coffin was little interest from Sony Ericsson in making it compatible with its devices. Only a few phones work with the Gameboard, excluding both T300 and T310. This made this accessory an option only for a small group of people that bought a premium phone like the Z600. Soon the situation became even worse when Sony Ericsson introduced a new charging ports on their devices. All of this led to the EGB-10 becoming a quickly obsolete gadget, which didn't garner much attention from even the target audience. It's a shame that it ended like that, and it makes you wonder what would happen if it gained enough popularity for there to be a successor released. Would Gameboards become the standard for mobile gaming enthusiasts? Would Sony conquer the mobile gaming market right after dominating the console wars? Though it doesn't seem like this would ever happen, judging from how everything unfolded. Especially after the failure of N-Gage, hopes for gaming on mobile phones becoming something more serious died down, and at the same time Sony released the PSP, which became its focus. This forced Gameboard into becoming only a side note in the history of mobile gaming, yet still a unique and worth remembering one.